ZASLOW Show 2.0. We're always brought to us by our official beer of ZASLOW Show 2.0. Johnny Cuba, European roots, a Caribbean soul. Getting ready for the game tomorrow night, of course, game one. Hey, start your evening with a refreshing German lager in a can. Pick up a six-pack right now at your local Sedano's. Presidente, Winn-Dixie, Fresco y Mas. Always got to drink responsibly, which is easy when you're in the ZASLOW Mansion family room watching Heat Celtics game one. And, of course, don't forget Johnny Cuba's mantra, stay tranquilo. And joining us here on the Johnny Cuba guest line, Brian Geltzeiler, SiriusXM NBA Radio. Always glad to have you on the show. First thing I want to get at you here, Brian, a big topic of conversation for the Heat fan over the last, 3 years has been defending this team against the argument that the bubble was the bubble and that was a fluke. Well, with 3 years later, we got the same four teams that were in the Final Four in the bubble back in the Final Four right now. Is that conversation, is that argument that the bubble wasn't a real thing for a team like the Heat, is that conversation over?
I didn't even think the conversation should have started, Jonathan. I thought it was the biggest piece of garbage that I ever heard in my life. The second some idiot floated it out there, and it's been disproven here now with getting the same four teams back in the Final Four 3 years later. People lose sight very quickly of the difficulty that players, coaches, executives, league employees had when they had to go into that bubble. Think about it. We were in the fall of 2020. They had to go into an area of the country in Florida, Central Florida, where the pandemic was raging, where the numbers were as high as they had ever been. There were no vaccines. It was a huge leap of faith to leave your families during this scary time to go finish an NBA season. People want to put an asterisk on that. You put an asterisk on that because it was harder. It wasn't easier. It was harder. And there was no fans, so the games don't matter. It's the dumbest argument I ever saw in my life. It was something different than these players ever had to do in their lives. And it required an enormous level of mental toughness, an enormous level of just, teamwork in general and counting on the guys around you. And frankly, if you didn't have the character as a team, you got exposed in the bubble in the worst way. So I never looked at the fact that the bubble wasn't real basketball. It's such a garbage, flimsy argument. And I'm thrilled that we have these four teams now back here 3 years later to prove exactly how stupid that argument is.
I look at these four teams, Brian, and I don't know if you watch HBO Succession. It's the best show on television.
I do.
Okay. And these four teams in the bubble, and of course, right now, it reminds me of, one of Logan Roy's final scenes with the children, which was, I love you, but you are not serious people. And I look at these four teams and I feel like they look at a lot of the other teams like, you're not serious people. And you look at the core groups of the Heat, Jimmy and Bam, the Celtics, Tatum and Brown, Jokic and Murray, LeBron and AD. I feel like these are serious basketball people, and it's not a coincidence that these are the Final Four teams.
I agree with you. And I think there's one very important thing that you have to factor in, which is playoff experience advancing late into rounds. All these teams have it. Listen, Denver probably has the least of it of everybody because out of the three, this is a group that hasn't made a finals appearance. But Denver did go to the conference finals in the bubble, and they have been the best team in the West all year. So the fact that they're there is certainly not a fluke. The Lakers are a great story, and the Lakers are a great story in this way, Jonathan. They're a great story in the fact that they redid this team on the fly. And the thing is, I don't know that they're here if Joseph Tsai is willing to trade Kyrie Irving to them. Think about that. Joseph Tsai, the owner of the Brooklyn Nets, refused to trade Kyrie Irving to the Lakers because that's where he wanted to go, because he was that mad at Kyrie Irving. The Lakers were all over that deal. And when that deal couldn't go through, they pivoted and they were able to get D'Angelo Russell and Jared Vanderbilt, Malik Beasley. The Hachimura deal happened before that. That's one that fell under the radar. Picking Dennis Schroeder up off the scrap heap, developing Austin Reeves. This is a fantastic story with the Lakers. And, seeing LeBron do this at the age of 38, even though he's probably not the most important player on this team anymore, that goes to Anthony Davis, who right now is the great equalizer out of the four teams here because he's the best defensive player left and probably the best defensive player in the NBA in these playoffs. That's how great he's been. And then you look at the East. The thing about the Heat is this. You can tell me no PJ Tucker. Well, what did PJ Tucker just do for Philadelphia? You can tell me even no Tyler Hero, and I've heard some rumblings that maybe Hero does get back at one point in this series. We'll have to see what happens. But the bottom line for Miami is that it's the character still the same, the culture still the same, the core is still the same. They approach things in a way that other teams don't approach things. This is the smartest team in the league, and I want to stress that because you're going to have to be to stay in a series with Boston. They're going to understand in a moment's notice the scouting reports on who to close out on the three-point line and who not to. Think about that. You look at two guys there, I'm going to run to one because his shooting percentage is higher than the other one. You're going to see a lot of that out of Miami. They did a great job with it with the Knicks when they blitz Brunson on the ball. They'll do that again here. Frankly, it'll be what keeps them in the series. So I look at these four teams, and listen, I haven't gotten to Boston much yet, and Boston's the most talented by an enormous margin. But the thing to watch in this Boston-Miami series more than anything else is the coaching matchup, because Eric Spoelstra is a fantastic coach. He just outcoached Tom Thibodeau, and I don't blame Thibodeau. He essentially had his team exposed for some of their offensive weaknesses. In this particular case, Spo is going to find something here with Boston. Joe Mazzulla doesn't operate well late in games, and Jason Tatum bailed him out of that in game 6 and 7 of this Philly series. Now, listen, Tatum's fantastic, and he will have his fair share of big games in this series. But for the Heat here, and he beat them alone. Well, he beat the Sixers alone in game 7. I don't know that you'll see a ton of that here. I think that Miami will force the ball out of his hands as much as possible. This is going to be a very, very interesting series. But the thing is, if Boston wins, it's going to be on talent. Spo will win the chess match. That I promise you, Jonathan.
How much better do you think Boston is than they were this time last year against Miami?
I think they're probably the same. I mean, Brogdon makes them a better team. There's no doubt. I don't know how well Joe Mazzulla uses Brogdon. I don't know that he uses him enough. Now, I think this is a series where Brogdon's going to be important because I do think that essentially you'll see Mazzulla match down at times. Mazzulla has shown a tendency to want to play smaller. He was very hesitant to go back to the two bigs against Philadelphia and only did it with his back to the wall. Well, he did it with his back to the wall, and it worked. If Miami's not going to look to match up that way, Miami will stay small against you. And with Bam at 5, and then they'll play 4 perimeter guys, maybe Kevin Love here and there. But I think with Love is not on the floor, Mazzulla's going to be in a hurry to get extra guards on the floor. He's going to want more White and Brogdon on the floor. He loves to play Marcus Smart 35, 40 minutes a game. So you'll see tons of Smart on the floor. So I think he'll try to match down against Miami and think he can do it that way. You'll see probably the 2 big lineup when Kevin Love's on the court.
Tell me what you make of Jimmy Butler. And what I mean by that is, look, we all know he's a great player. But if you're a star player, at least the way I see it, if you're a star player in the regular season and you can replicate those star player numbers from an 82-game schedule where you play a lot of bad teams, second nights of back-to-back, whatever, and then you could be that same star player in a postseason where you're playing the same good team every single night, that's what a star is, when you could still be that guy. Jimmy Butler is better than that guy from the regular season in the playoffs. He really is the guy who takes it to the next level. And that's we don't see that very much, where not only are you putting up the same great numbers from the regular season in the playoffs, which is hard enough, his numbers are always better in the postseason. What do you make of Jimmy?
Well, 2 things here, Jonathan. Number one, I think sometimes and certainly this year, I think we've made a little too much of that in this respect. He was a second-team All-NBA performer this year. He had an excellent regular season. He played 65 games. He had a really, really good regular season this year. The thing for Butler is that he doesn't pace himself in the playoffs. He paces himself in the regular season. It's an 82-game season. It's a long season. He plays a lot of minutes when he plays. He's got a lot of mileage on his tires over the years. Listen, when Butler was a free agent, Miami signed him. I spoke to a bunch of executives around the league who were taking pause on offering Jimmy a max deal. Taking pause. Yeah. The only other spot he had a max offer was Philly. There were other places did want to offer him a max deal. And the main reason I got for not wanting to offer a max deal is too much tread in his tires. There've been some injuries over the years. He's played a lot of minutes. Don't know that he can sustain that pace. Well, Butler, in a very similar way LeBron James has done as he's gotten older here, has learned how to pace himself in the regular season and still be a very good regular season player. When he hits the playoffs, he's not pacing himself anymore. It's 90 miles an hour with his hair on fire. I thought a very interesting thing he said after Game 5 of the Knicks series, where he had 19 points, which is one of, I think, his lowest point output in the playoffs so far. He said that I am going to continue to make the right basketball play. I am not going to force things. If shots are there, I'm going to take them. If passing the ball and trusting my teammates is what is there, that's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to change what I'm doing based upon situation. Now, again, I think in some spots he'll impose his will on a game because he can do that uniquely in a way that very few in the league can. But I think it's very important to understand that Butler is not going to pace himself here. He's going to continue to go as hard as he can possibly go. And the thing for Jimmy Butler is he creates a matchup nightmare for the Boston Celtics.
What do you make of the way the Sixers finished their season? I don't think it's a team in the league that chokes the way the Sixers do. I think we all knew. I mean, look, maybe you thought the Sixers were going to win it. I don't know, but I feel like we all knew going into that Game 7 exactly the way it was going to play out. I mean, I tweeted out at halftime of Game 7, which was, I think, a 3-point game at halftime. I said, don't worry, Sixer fans. Harden's going to have a huge second half on the road in Game 7, which, of course, nobody in the world believes. We all knew the way it was going to play out. But the thing for me, Brian, I feel like we all, which by the way, I'm looking at my television right now. Doc Rivers was just fired.
Yes, I was about to say that when you got done with the question.
So we'll do that. We'll do that in a second. I almost feel like the end of that series, we know what Harden is. I feel like we also found out a little bit what Joel Embiid is too.
Well, all right. So let me start with Embiid because I'm going to cut him a little bit of a break. But they didn't lose this series in Game 7. They lost this series in Game 6.
Yeah.
And Joel Embiid, and he was visibly unhappy. I was in the Sixers locker room after Game 6. He was visibly unhappy. And he said it to the media. He didn't touch the ball the last 5 minutes of the game. And so when you're a big guy like that, I don't know how much we can hang on him. James Harden played poorly. He really did. What's happened to James Harden is that he's become predictable. He's become predictable in the way that he doesn't want to try to finish at the rim anymore. He only wants to pass out for 3-point shots. And Boston got smart. Boston started to play him to pass, not to play him to shoot. So all of a sudden, he's driving to the basket. Well, if they're leaving you a path to the basket that you're not taking and you're kicking out to covered shooters, what's going to happen? A, contested shots, B, turnovers. And that's exactly what did happen. So I think for James Harden here, he's changed his game in a way where he doesn't necessarily believe in himself to the extent that he needs to believe in himself anymore. Listen, I think Philly had some flaws here regarding what they could do defensively. You know, when you look down the stretch of Game 6, again, I look at Game 6 as the place where they lost this series. Yeah. I look down the stretch of Game 6. Jason Tatum, before he hit those 3 shots, was 1 of 14. Why? Because Tobias Harris guarded him as good as anybody ever guards him. He did a fantastic job on him. But what Boston started to do is Boston went ahead and said, hey, you know what? We're going to get anybody but Tobias Harris switched on to him. So they got Harden 1 possession. Tatum elevated over him, hit a shot. They got Maxey 1 possession. Tatum elevated over him, hit a 3. And then Tatum's rolling. Then Tatum doesn't care who's on him. And that kind of carried over into Game 7. Here's my point. The Sixers were light on really good perimeter defenders. That was the big problem. And ultimately, I don't know that Harden and Maxey is a good mix for them. Listen, Harden doesn't want to be there beyond this year. I know we've heard a lot of Houston rumors. I reported this yesterday.
Crazy, right? Okay. That's really a thing that he might go back to Houston?
It's a thing that he might go back to. It's a significant thing that he might go back to Houston. The other place that I've been told that James Harden has his eye on going is to Phoenix. He would like to be able to go to Phoenix. So, and keep in mind, he went to Arizona State. So those 2 places are places he wants to go. You know, so I feel bad for Daryl Morey and all this, the president of the Sixers. Daryl moved heaven and earth and made what was a great trade at the time. When you look what happened to Ben Simmons, it still looks like a pretty good trade, even with things failing. It's still good. It is. Okay. Daryl Morey brought James Harden there, knowing James Harden's history, but he counted on their relationship to not have James beg out at any point in time. So you saw Ramona Shelburne's report yesterday. James is not as inclined to stay if Doc's going to be there. That Doc gets fired today. I don't necessarily think Harden had anything to do with that. I think it was something that was on an ownership level, and it came to a certain point where I think they think this group has run its course with Doc. I don't think it's, listen, I think that if you want to hang one thing on Doc, it was the Atlanta loss. That was a bad one 2 years ago. I look at the last 2 years and I'm like, Doc did a great job with this team. They went to Game 7 against the Celtics. The Celtics were a way more talented team. He did a really nice job, and I know that third quarter of Game 7 is what they're going to point to. Doc didn't have them ready, and they certainly kind of rolled over when things got rough, and Tatum ripped their throats out and all that. It's hard for me to place all of that at Doc's feet. Listen, I understood why Milwaukee fired Mike Budenholzer. I understood why Phoenix fired Monty Williams.
Yeah.
I get why Philadelphia is firing Doc. It just doesn't feel good. It feels weird. I think Doc has done a really good job with this team and kind of deserved a better fate. But I also think for Philadelphia, there's major changes afoot here. They're going to redo this roster around Embiid in a big way. And I think they want to make sure they give him some input on everybody that's going to be around him here. Because there's something that Bill Simmons of The Ringer continues to say. And he's the only one that's saying it right now. But Simmons doesn't throw stuff at the wall. Simmons is talking about the fact that there's a shelf life on Embiid's happiness too there. Like, we're hearing all the time about the shelf life on Luka Doncic in Dallas and his happiness there, and he could ask out. That clock is ticking for Embiid as well. So in terms of a coaching hire and a redo of the roster, this may be the last chance the Sixers get to do it around Embiid. So I think that's something that we have to keep a very close eye on in Philly as well. Embiid's status there and his level of happiness, because I'll tell you right now that after Game 6, not seeing the ball, the last 5 minutes of that game, Joel Embiid was very, very unhappy.
Brian, who does not return for management included for the Golden State Warriors?
The only one I think that may not return is Bob Myers. I think that the fact that he's waited this long to make this decision is extremely, extremely telling. I think Golden State has probably won their last title with this group. With that said, you have to keep them together, right? I mean, you can't start piecing these guys apart, especially when you've looked at this young core that you've had. You already sold off Wiseman to something help you make a run this year. Moody has ended up looking okay here in the playoffs. Kuminga is not really playable defensively, but the Warriors also, with how they handled last offseason, I think they screwed up their culture a little bit. And I think it's important to note this. And I do think this could be one of the reasons that Bob Myers wants out, because I don't know that Bob necessarily wanted to do what he did with Jordan Poole here. Jordan Poole last year in the NBA Finals was largely unplayable, Jonathan. He's so bad defensively, they had to hide him at certain points in time and bench him at certain points in time. Besides for Steph Curry's greatness, the other main reason the Warriors won a championship last year, because Andrew Wiggins was fantastic on both ends of the floor, but especially defensively. He was a prime perimeter defender. Look at what Tatum just did to Tobias Harris in that last series, who guarded him very well. And then think about how Wiggins guarded Tatum in last year's finals. Wiggins was vital. He was huge. So extension time comes and the money comes. And Jordan Poole gets $35 million a year in an extension, and Andrew Wiggins gets 28. You want defensive culture. You want to build things where you want guys to be able to guard people. You need to pay guys for defense. It can't just be for offensive numbers. So now you have guys like Kuminga and Moody that are showing disinterest in wanting to be good defensive players who haven't gotten their big money yet, because offensive numbers are what's going to get me paid. And I think they've kind of screwed up that culture a little bit. And I think it's one of the reasons you may see Myers head for the exits. There potentially could be other interesting jobs available for him where he can rebuild the whole thing and do it again on his own. And I think it's something that bears watching here with Bob Myers in Golden State. But I think you'll see, listen, Draymond has said he wants to be back. Shams Charania of The Athletic reported the other day that Golden State would like to figure out, a team-friendly extension. But Draymond didn't max out money on his last deal. I think he's happy where he is. He's happy with Curry and Clay, and that core is going to be together. And listen, it's a nice thing for Golden State. What else happens? What's next? What can they do under this new CBA, which is a train wreck? And the Poole thing, is what's going to really handcuff them, because they're not going to be able to make any moves. Their core here is going to be Steph, Draymond, Clay, Wiggins, and Jordan Poole. And I don't know that you're going to be able to win consistently with that group here going forward.
I got two more things for you here, Brian. Ja Morant, what are you hearing as far as, look, I don't even know it's worth asking your opinion. Obviously, he comes off as such a huge loser. I don't know what other opinion there is than that about what's going on. So my real question is, what are you hearing as far as what the league is going to do? I think Adam Silver it has been earning a reputation recently as being pretty soft. I think Ja Morant has made the commissioner, the league, the team look very foolish. What are you hearing? What do you think could the punishment wind up being for Ja Morant?
Well, it's a good thing there's no way they're bringing back Dylan Brooks because he's the problem, right, Jonathan?
Right,
okay.
right.
So here's listen. I think the suspension is going to be significant. I don't think it's going to be announced immediately, and I think that they really have to do due diligence on all of this to find out exactly the nature of the firearm. Where it came from, is it licensed, the legality, all of it. All of these things have to be addressed. Listen, I think that what happened during the season, they really gave him a major, major pass and tried to pretend like they didn't. And I think that's part of what creates this. He supposedly went for counseling. The counseling or whatever facility he went to, that was very short-lived. He didn't stay there very long. And he didn't stay there very long because let's make no mistake about it, the Grizzlies wanted to get him back for the playoffs.
You don't think the solution was not allowing the team to stay overnight in Miami, Los Angeles? That didn't fix everything?
No, it didn't fix everything, but I do think at a certain point in time these guys have to grow up a little bit, yeah. and I think and it's not just him; it's Dylan Brooks also, but there's more. There's Jaren Jackson and Desmond Bane. Now, granted, I'm not grouping Jackson and Bane with him because they're not waving guns on Instagram Live. You know what I mean? But there's a culture there where there's a mountain of immaturity, and something's got to be done about that. I'll tell you, with all the coaches we're seeing fired, one guy I'm surprised has kept his job is Taylor Jenkins. And he's done a great job of developing this team, but it's the wild, wild west over there.
They're an embarrassment now, and he's been in charge.
Right, the wild, wild west over there. And at a certain point in time, there's going to have to be some discipline handed down. Now, the Grizzlies were very quick to suspend him from all team activities. Well, that's great. It's middle of May, and there are no team activities.
He can't go to the draft lottery party tonight. He's not allowed.
Right. That's exactly it. But I'm sure he's having his own. And I also think it's important to know with Ja Morant, this isn't just about 2 Instagram lives where he has brandished firearms. This is about an incident with playing pickup at his house where a gun was flashed. This is about an incident at a mall that his mother was there where he showed up.
Every incident is involving guns. Every incident.
Right. Yeah, this is also about, keep in mind, and this is something that the league wasn't able to find a whole ton of proof and walked away from this. All right. But this is also about a laser being shined on team personnel at the Indiana Pacers as Ja was leaving the facility. And there's one particular friend of Ja's that's involved in all of this. That's right next to him the entire time. And the guy's name escapes me. It doesn't even matter what the guy's name is. But I do think that a lot needs to be done here regarding Ja Morant and what's going to happen going forward, and a meaningful suspension and costing him a lot of money. Maybe that's something that sets him straight. But I do think the Grizzlies have to take a look at their role in enabling Morant to behave in the way that he's behaved.
Finally here, Brian, tonight, as anticipated, a draft lottery, maybe since 2003. Maybe you want to throw the Zion draft lottery in there, but certainly this player tonight, Victor Wembanyama, we're going to find out where he's going. He's supposed to be a franchise-altering player. Do you get fired up over a draft lottery tonight? Or are you sitting at the TV, wondering which teams are going to be skipped? Oh, my God, so-and-so jumped into the top 3. Are you into this tonight?
I'm always very into it. And that doesn't mean I'm sitting in front of the TV. I'll watch it on my phone and see how it shakes out. But I think it's a very meaningful draft lottery. It's a very special player. He has the ability to transform an organization. There are a couple teams that are in the mix for him that, if they do get him because of other draft picks that they've made, can catapult themselves immediately into a playoff setting and be very good. I look at a team like the Orlando Magic. Yeah. With the core the Orlando Magic has, you had Wembanyama there, and all of a sudden
that's a playoff team. That's a playoff team if they get him.
We are good immediately. Listen, I'll give you another team. They're one of the worst teams in the league this year, but part of that was Cade Cunningham being out. Okay, but the thing is, Detroit with Jaden Ivey, with Cunningham, you got Wiseman. You put him in there, all of a sudden this thing starts to look much better, much quicker. So wherever he ends up, there's going to be a major, major impact, and a team's going to be elevated. And I think that's really, really important here. So this is a very, very meaningful draft lottery. And then you have other different subplots. The whole Dallas Knicks subplot is major tonight, because if somebody jumps in and from the bottom four into that top four, and Dallas gets pushed down from 10 to 11, the Knicks get that pick. And that's a big deal, and that's something that's worth watching also. So there's a lot of different permutations tonight for the lottery. It's always fun. I'll be checking it out.
Brian, excellent job. When can we hear you again on SiriusXM NBA Radio?
Tomorrow night, post game, as soon as the Celtics Heat game ends, you'll hear me on SiriusXM NBA Radio, channel 86. And then, of course, I'll be on Saturday morning with my guy, Sam Mitchell, 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern time on NBA Weekend.
Awesome. Great job, Brian. Thanks a lot for joining me today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jonathan. Appreciate it, buddy. Take care.